It was late spring when I finally moved into my first real apartment in downtown Chicago. After years of dorm rooms and shared houses, the studio felt like a step forward, a marker of adulthood, even if it was only a tiny place on the top floor of a 3-story building. The walls were faded beige, the carpet worn thin, and the kitchenette barely large enough for a mini fridge and a hot plate. The bathroom was cramped, with a shower head that leaked no matter how tight I turned the knobs. My bed pressed against one wall, a second-hand couch against another, and a desk squeezed in front of the only large window. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That window was the apartment's only defining feature. It overlooked the narrow alley between my building and the one across. The alley was too tight for cars and too shadowed for much light to ever reach it. During the day, it was gloomy. At night, it turned into an obsidian void, broken only by the faint orange glow of a faraway street lamp. At first, I didn't mind. My life followed a routine. I worked evening shifts at a cafe a few blocks away. By the time I returned home, it was usually 2:30 or 3 a.m. I would kick off my shoes, heat something quick to eat, collapse on the couch, and scroll on my phone until sleep took me. That became my ritual. The darkness of the alley didn't matter. I barely looked out the window. For the first month, it felt ordinary until the night everything shifted. It was 2:45 a.m. when I came home, exhausted. I flicked on the overhead light, dropped my bag on the couch, and in that instant, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something. Movement across the alley. I turned my head quickly. The curtain in the opposite window had twitched, just slightly. My chest tightened. I stared, holding my breath. The fabric hung still. Probably a draft, I told myself. Maybe the window was cracked open. I tried to laugh it off, but my pulse didn't slow down. Something about the way it moved, it seemed deliberate. I slept poorly that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the curtain shifting again. The following evening, it happened once more. I arrived home around 3 a.m., turned on the lamp near my bed, and there it was. The curtain stirred. This time, not a flutter. A hand. Pale fingers curled around the edge, pulling it back just enough for someone to peer through. I froze, my breath stuck in my throat. For several seconds, the slit in the curtain stayed open. I couldn't see anything inside, just darkness. Then, the fabric dropped, closing again. I stayed rooted where I was, staring across the alley. A sickening realization sank in. I had never seen lights in that apartment before. Not once. I had assumed it was empty. But at WASN sleep became nearly impossible after that. Every night, the same ritual repeated. I would come home, flick on a light, and almost instantly, the curtain across the alley would stir. Always just a little. Always with that same unnatural timing, as if whoever or whatever was behind it had been waiting in total darkness for me to arrive. I tried experiments. One night, I left the lights off and sat silently by the window. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. The curtain remained still. But the second I flicked on the light switch, the fabric shifted. A hand, a parting, and darkness again. It wasn't random. It was intentional. The landlord swore the apartment across the alley was vacant. Been empty for months, he said when I cornered him in the hallway. Nobody's rented it. He gave me a confused look when I pressed him, and I didn't push further. Without evidence, I would sound paranoid, but the sleepless nights took their toll. I started showing up late to work, yawning through my shifts. My manager warned me twice. I told Jamie, my closest friend from college, about the curtain. She tried to reassure me at first. "You're just overtired," she said. "Chicago's a noisy city. Shadows, reflections, Maybe you're imagining it. I wanted to believe her. But then came the note that it was nearly 4 a.m. when I returned from a brutal shift at the cafe. My backpack dragged on the floor as I reached my door. That's when I noticed it, something small stuck in the frame. A folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Scrawled in blue ink were 2 letters. Hey, Doc, just that. The hallway spun. I stumbled into my apartment, slammed the door, and rushed to the window. Across the alley, the curtain was still. Perfectly still. Heart pounding. I dialed Jamie. My voice cracked as I told her. She didn't hesitate. Get out of there, now. I stuffed essentials into a backpack wallet, phone, clothes, and bolted into the street, not stopping until I was blocks away. The next morning, with daylight giving me a fragile sense of safety, I stormed into the landlord's office. I demanded answers. After some hesitation, he produced a key to the supposedly vacant unit. The moment the door creaked open, dust filled my nostrils. The air was heavy, stale, untouched. Footsteps echoed across the warped floorboards as I walked through the silent rooms. Empty, completely bare, until I reached the back room. There, facing directly toward my own apartment window, sat a single metal folding chair, placed with intention. Waiting. My stomach lurched. The police were called. They dusted for prints, searched every corner. Nothing. No signs of recent occupancy. No fingerprints. Nothing to prove what I knew in my bones. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching. I moved out within days. I didn't care about breaking my lease, losing my deposit, any of it. The thought of that chair, that note, those curtains, I couldn't spend another night there. But leaving didn't help. Sleep refused to return. Even in my new apartment across the city, I woke at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat, convinced I felt eyes on me. Walking home from work, I caught myself glancing up at random windows, scanning for the flicker of a curtain. Jamie told me I was developing paranoia. Maybe she was right. But then, sometimes, I'd swear I saw something like the faintest shift behind the glass of an unfamiliar building. Always subtle, always vanishing the second I looked straight at it. Months passed. The memories didn't fade. Instead, they sharpened. I began cataloging details I had missed before. The exact way the curtain had moved. The silence of the apartment. Across the alley when I entered it, as though it had swallowed sound. The note wedged so carefully into my doorframe, as if whoever left it had wanted me to know, but only just enough. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. If I had ignored the note. If I had dared to look harder into that gap in the curtain. But IDN, single quotes T dot, and now, I'll never know. Last week, walking home late from another closing shift, I passed a building I'd never noticed before. An old brick structure with blacked out windows. Something made me pause. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw it. A curtain. Shifting. Just slightly. I stopped. My chest seized. I forced myself to turn, to look directly at the window. Stillness. Nothing. I stood there far too long, waiting for it to move again. My mind screamed at me to keep walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside was waiting, watching, just like before. And as I write this now, alone in yet another apartment, the same thought keeps circling in my mind. What if it never mattered which building I lived in? What if it was never about that single apartment across the alley? What if it followed me? When I was 12 years old, my family left behind the comfort of a quiet suburban town and moved to a remote part of Oregon, deep within sprawling pine forests that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The house we moved into wasn't new, nor was it particularly welcoming. Built in the 1940s, It had creaky wooden floors that moaned under every step, walls that smelled faintly of mildew, and a steep staircase that complained even under the lightest tread. The attic was filled with the odor of mold and dust, and though I rarely went up there, I could feel the weight of it above me whenever I lay in bed. About 30 feet from the back door stood a detached shed, leaning slightly, filled with rusted tools, yellowed tarps, and strange remnants of the past owner's life. My father swore he would clean it out one of these weekends. But weekends passed, and the shed remained sealed with its mystery dot at first. Everything felt like an adventure. My younger sister and I discovered trails that twisted through the woods like secret passages, stumbled upon streams that whispered beneath moss-covered rocks, and even found a hidden grove where sunlight filtered through the trees and broken rays, making the air shimmer like something out of a fairy tale. Our golden retriever, Max, became our fearless explorer, racing ahead of us, circling back with wagging tail, his ears always twitching to sounds we couldn't hear. In the daylight, the forest was magical. But when the sun dipped below the horizon and the trees stood like dark sentinels, the forest shifted into something else entirely, a silence so heavy, so absolute, it pressed on my chest like a weight. First night I realized something was wrong. It was already past midnight. I was curled beneath my blanket, reading by flashlight even though I wasn't supposed to. The house was still, my parents asleep upstairs, when Max suddenly leapt from his spot at the foot of my bed and bolted downstairs. His barking was nothing like his playful daytime. Yaps, it was deep, furious, urgent. He stood at the back door, teeth bared, facing the direction of the shed. The motion sensor light flicked on outside, spilling pale light across the yard. Long shadows stretched from the shed's edges, black and twisting, as if the forest itself had come closer. I froze, my heart racing, but when I pressed my face to the glass, there was nothing. Just the shed, still and dark. The next morning, my father noticed boot prints in the dirt between the house and the shed. They were deep, deliberate, and fresh. He tried to brush it off as some hiker who had gotten lost, or maybe a local hunter, passing through. But something about the prints unsettled me. They didn't lead back toward the trees. They stopped at the shed door dot. Over the next few weeks, Max grew increasingly restless. Every few nights, sometimes for hours at a time, he would bark and growl at the shed. Sometimes he pressed his nose to the crack of the back door, whining as if something was waiting just beyond. And always, in the mornings, new footprints appeared in the soil, always leading to the shed. Never away. One night, sometime around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. I froze, my ears straining. At first, it was slow, deliberate steps, then a pause, then another crunch, closer this time. My throat tightened, and I couldn't move. When I finally dared to peek through the blinds, my heart lurched into my throat. There, in the pale glow of the motion light, stood a man. He was tall, his shoulders hunched beneath a filthy gray coat that hung loosely on his frame. His face was shadowed by the angle of the light, but I could make out the glint of something metallic in his hand. A knife. My scream caught in my chest as Max erupted downstairs, snarling with a ferocity I'd never heard before. The man turned his head slightly toward the dog's barking, but didn't run. He just stood there, still as stone, facing the shed. Then, as if the darkness itself had swallowed him, he stepped into the trees and was gone. My father stormed outside with his rifle, calling out into the night, but the forest answered only with silence. The police arrived an hour later, their flashlights sweeping across the yard. They followed the footprints, which once again ended at the shed. This time, they opened it. What they found inside didn't belong to us, or to anyone we knew. Animal. Bones lay in piles along the dirt floor, brittle and broken. Strange carvings had been etched into the ground, circles, jagged lines, symbols that didn't make sense, but made my stomach twist. In the corner was a rotting backpack stuffed with wallets, watches, and clothing that didn't belong to my family. Each item felt like a fragment of someone else's life, stolen and abandoned. One of the officers pulled out a notebook from the pack. Its pages were filled with rambling scribbles of eyes, drawings of houses, crude sketches of families standing at windows. There were no names, no dates, but I could feel the obsession bleeding from the pages. Whoever had written them had been watching. Maybe not just us. Maybe for years. The police promised they would increase patrols, that the woods made it easy for drifters to hide. But their words felt thin, like tissue paper trying to stop a flood. And then 1 month later, Max disappeared. We searched the trails, called his name until our voices cracked, drove up and down the narrow road that led into town. But there was nothing. His collar, his leash, his food bowl remained, but he was gone. That night, just after 2 a.m., I woke to the slow, agonizing creak of the back door opening. My father was already awake, rifle in hand, creeping down the stairs. I followed, trembling, and together we reached the kitchen just as the motion sensor. Light flicked on. He was there, the man in the gray coat, standing in the yard, facing us. In one hand, dangling loosely, was Max's collar. In the other, the blade gleamed faintly in the moonlight. My father shouted, fired a warning shot into the air. The sound tore through the silence, but the man didn't flinch. Only when my father fired again, closer, did he finally retreat, slipping into the trees as if he belonged to them. We chased after him, shouting, but the forest devoured him whole. Police searched again. They set traps, combed the woods with dogs, questioned every neighbor within miles. Nothing. No trace of him. No trace of Max. Just the shed, its dirt floor scarred with symbols that refused to fade. Not long after, we packed up everything we could fit into a truck and left the cabin behind. My parents claimed was for our safety, that no house was worth living in fear, but for me it felt like running. And though we left the house, the woods, and the shed, I couldn't leave behind what had happened. Even years later, when I was grown and living far from Oregon, the memories stalked me like shadows I couldn't escape. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake with the certainty that someone is standing just outside my window. I'll lie frozen. In bed, my skin prickling, my heart racing, convinced I hear the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Other times, while walking through a crowded city street, I'll catch a flicker of gray in the corner of my eye coat, a shadow, and for a split second, I'm 12 again, staring into the dark. I tried to tell myself he was just a man, flesh and blood, but deep down, I know better. There was something about the way he moved, the way he vanished, the way the shed seemed to breathe when he stood near it. He wasn't just watching. He was waiting, and sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I wonder if he still is. In the summer of 2018, my friends and I, Abby, Marcus, Tim, Hannah, and I planned a weekend trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were all in our early 20s, eager to escape the city and spend a few days in the quiet wilderness. After hours of driving, we arrived at a remote campsite, far from cell service, surrounded by towering trees and dense forest. The first night was peaceful. We set up our tents near a small lake, started a fire, and shared stories late into the night. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, and the stars stretched endlessly across the sky. It felt perfect, isolated, and safe. But on the second night, around 11 p.m., things started to feel wrong. Marcus suddenly stiffened, pointing toward the woods. Did anyone else see that? he whispered. A shadow moved between the trees, too quick to be a deer. 20 minutes later, a stick snapped sharply nearby. Our nerves tightened. Abby suggested going to bed, but the tension made sleep impossible. We extinguished the fire and zipped into our tents. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. Breathing sounded just outside, moving from one side of the tent to the other. My heart raced. At first, I thought it might be one of my friends, perhaps stepping out to pee. But the sound was heavier, deliberate, and unfamiliar. Morning revealed footprints circling our tents, some bare, some muddy. One set was unmistakably human and barefoot, leaving a sickening feeling in my stomach. We tried to joke about it, calling it a prank or a hiker, but deep down, we knew it was something more sinister. The following night, we stayed awake, building a larger fire for light. Around 2 a.m., we heard leaves crunching in the darkness. Then a voice, a low human voice, whispered words we couldn't understand. Marcus shone his flashlight briefly and caught a naked figure crouching behind a tree. It scrambled back into the woods, disappearing like a shadow. We remained huddled around the fire, terrified, communicating only in whispers. Every rustle in the leaves, every snapping twig, sent waves of panic through the group. Sleep was impossible. Dawn brought no relief, only exhaustion and lingering fear. We packed quickly and left the campsite, glancing nervously at every shadow. At the ranger station, we reported the incident. The ranger mentioned previous reports of intruders in the area, sometimes stealing items, sometimes worse. We didn't ask for details. The thought alone was enough. Even now, I remember the cold sweat, the bare footprints, the sound of heavy breathing near our tents, and the shadowy figure disappearing into the forest. That weekend in the mountains left a permanent mark, a reminder that isolation can conceal dangers unseen, and that sometimes being watched is more terrifying than being confronted.